And good evening, all. We should be streaming now. I'm here with the one and the only Thunderous One. Thanks, Thunderous, for joining me at 7:30 p.m. Also time, 6:30 p.m. London time.
That's right. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, and I see we've got Century Since in the UK. Hello there. We need to chat again. I need to make another trip to Old Blighty and come visit you guys. Casey, welcome. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell, great to see you from New Zealand. Artsy Fartsy Nerdy Woody, hello. Yeah, so guys, Thunderous and I were just having a chat prior to this. Let me change screens for one moment. Thunderous sent me this, and I'm sure you'll be speaking about this. Let me share my screen, Thunderous, so you can see what I am showing
Sure.
the rest of the world. So we can just do that. Okay, so yeah, so I'm sharing what I am showing everyone on the screen. This is from the UN. But I want to briefly mention this. So I've started working on another presentation, one of the 40 plus that I've already got going. Hello there, Connor. Okay, so the French Revolution was a socialist revolution. However, it was also a Freemason revolution. However, it was also an atheistic genocide. However, it also happened to be a case of a very much anti-Christian atheist genocide, but it also introduced new philosophies and new moralities, an attempt to replace Christianity in every way, to hollow it out and replace it with sort of man-made ideas and concepts. Now, I recently watched an interesting talk on Isaac Newton, and the simple story here is that I've seen Muslims claiming that Isaac Newton was a Muslim. And this is really odd because everyone knows Moses was a Muslim, Jesus was a Muslim, Abraham was a Muslim. Next thing we're going to have Einstein was a Muslim, but right now, so Isaac Newton is a Muslim. Now everyone knows, Doctor Who showed us, Isaac Newton was actually a gay Indian. So I don't know where the Muslims get the fact that so he's a gay Indian. Okay, let's stick with the established BBC facts here. That said, the claim is that Isaac Newton was an Arian, in other words, an anti-Trinitarian, a heretic, that he did not believe in the Trinity, did not accept Jesus as the Son of God. So he's either a Unitarian or an Arian. This is the common claim. And this was the claim being made by this professor a couple of days ago on this talk on YouTube. So this is the Newton Project. Just like with Darwin, all of Darwin's notes have been put online. All of his written notes, or 90% of his notes, are available. Yes, Artsy Fartsy, Da Vinci was probably Muslim too. Exactly. That's what the Muslims are going to claim any moment now. In fact, you've probably just given them the idea. So before I get distracted, so this Newton Project, just like with Darwin, his handwritten notes have all been placed online. They're all available. Much of it's still in Latin though, but that's easy to translate. So I went and I had a look, and one of the quotes that I looked up was Deus Filius, right? Deus Filius. This is the Son of God. And you'll find that Newton writes very distinctly that Jesus is the Son of God. He's got whole chapters dedicated to God the Father, chapters on God the Son, and he discusses the biblical verses related to God the Father, God being the Son and God being the Holy Spirit. Now, I think it's really, really weird that in 10 minutes from having literally zero knowledge, we've got a PhD professor who's in his 60s or 70s who's been doing this for decades. And in 10 minutes, I can go to the very same sources that this professor has been reading. And in 10 minutes, I can see Isaac Newton calling Jesus Christ the Son of God. I find this really disturbing that me with no PhD from Africa, I can figure this out. And this professor and all these people are claiming he was. So yeah, there's more of a story here than I've been told. So Thunderous, over to you.
Yeah, I was just thinking with what what you're mentioning there about Newton. I think we're living in a day and age now where Google and YouTube have become verbs. It's what you do, and it's the laziest way of doing any research. You Google it, you YouTube it, and you have someone else that's done the research for you there. So therefore, there's no it becomes a situation where it's not incumbent on you to do any research for yourself. You have other people to do it, and because they speak with authority, you take it as a given that they know what they're talking about. So, and there's a reliance on the person that's publishing the material that their audience will not do any research on what's being said. So that's why they get away with it. And the sad thing is that will they will the majority of people get away with that. Believing this because of their inability to do research. We've come to an age now where people can't do research because they don't know how to do research now, Lloyd. What do you think?
No, I agree with what you say there. I fully agree. And yeah,
I
trusting
think,
authorities is becoming a problem. We know that
yes.
medical authorities can't be trusted. We know that governments at the moment cannot be trusted. And I mean, we know the news cannot be trusted. So what are we left with? We have to do all of this ourselves. Oh, by the way,
And
so,
that,
yeah,
that
go on, please. Please.
I was just going to say that that's kind of inculcated at an early age from with the education system, that sort of like inculcates that challenging the narrative is a wrong thing to do and to believe the sources. So when you're brought up in an education system that pretty much teaches you what to think and not how to think, then you've got a problem for when that child enters adulthood and they've had their brain shaped in such a manner to take information for what it is as a reality. And we're seeing repercussions of that in laws and legislations that are being passed that, as an example, because you mentioned medicine, politics and commerce, that we have phrases in our language now that are common, like misinformation, disinformation, fake news, post-truth. You now have on the BBC a fact-checking department. I mean, the BBC having a fact-checking department is laughable that that be the case, but fact-checking does allegedly. And I'd just like to mention a guy in England who's having his work challenged in a high court. Some people that are listening to the channel may be familiar with him, Richard D. Hall, and who's released a book about the Manchester bombing. Now, irrespective of what the facts are on that, what his book says and what the reality is as far as the Manchester bombing is concerned, that's not the issue here of importance. What is important is that we're finding opinion and free speech that goes against the narrative being stifled and being shut down. And I think we're getting to the point in media that if on social media and platforms and websites, if you're saying something that the government doesn't like, or that commerce doesn't like, or maybe even religions don't like, we see it particularly with the religion of Islam, you will be shut down. I think the phrase now on social media is cancel culture.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that cancel culture manifest itself, that your channels will be closed down, your Twitter accounts will be closed down, and pretty much it'll extend to your web pages will be closed down if it's releasing information that goes against the narrative.
Yeah, no, but
Because
if we all speak up, they can't shut us all down. At some point, you know, things no, things go wrong for them as well. And I
yeah,
think we're starting to
true.
see the rise of citizen media. We're starting to see the decline of organized, like CNN gets less reach on YouTube than many private YouTubers, for instance.
Well, this is where the danger is because the mainstream media news has seen its audience falling. It's also seen that people's attitude towards the information it receives is now being met with doubt, and that alternative news and alternative media is on the rise, and that's where the fear is because. We've gone from a generation, particularly when I was growing up in the 70s and in the 80s, and perhaps up until and including the very early 90s, where the media in this country would have, if you had a talk show as an example, where you had an audience and a guest panel and questions were asked, you would have a situation where opposing views would be questioned. The audience would then, if you're at home or in the audience or however you're watching the program, you would then have to sit there with two opinions and formulate
Well,
which one you
in the
side with and
UK, I saw
why.
a report stating that some politician, I mean, I don't have it in front of me now, but I was watching a politician say that anyone who disagrees with the government should be arrested. I mean, this is now
Yeah,
becoming a common thought. Let's just pause there for one moment. I just want to speak to the audience. My yeah, my wife's sister's father-in-law died today, about just after 1 p.m. Warsaw time this afternoon, about just after noon, London time. So I did mention that he was ill. He was very ill, unfortunately. So I'd just like to maybe show a few pictures. A few years ago, unfortunately, we went to Cape Town, and I managed to capture some photographs of him and the family. And he was a really lovely guy. Okay. Jadek Mietek, Mirosław. He was a really, really lovely guy. Sweet, polite, soft-spoken, friendly. So yeah. So let me just show a few photos of him. Just as a this was Franschhoek Motor Museum. We took him to, that's him taking a photo of the car that we used. This is my family. This is my grandmother in South Africa. She's in her 90s now. So that's him here. I mean, just really nice guy. Um, yeah, this is my sister-in-law, and that's his son over there. This is in this is Simonstown on Boulders Beach. That's him looking at the ocean there. This is my nephew, and that's him. And yeah, so yeah, this is him in the water again. It was a little cold that day. This is him with his son. Yep, two of them again. This is Hermanus in Cape Town. He was always making faces for the camera, so this is just him making faces here. They're really nice people, and so that's him again. We're on a boat looking at whales. So this is actually a whale trip. As you can see, he's really, I mean, it's just a really easygoing, funny, always laughing, always smiling. Yep, that's. So this was us before the boat ride. That's him. That's with his son. So, you know, that's my nephew Mihao. He had lunch. This was Hohook Pass in South Africa. So I was very glad I was able to take them there. This is in Table Mountain, just across actually Signal Hill, just across from Table Mountain. This is Devil's Peak. Lion's Head. Devil's Peak's on the left here. That's Table Mountain, and this was him. You can see he's smiling, and you know. Let's go back. Yeah, and then that's the family, and yeah, this is a beautiful beach out here. And we were looking at ostriches here. So this was us looking at going to visit some ostriches. Cape of Good Hope. And yeah, that was him. So yeah, the final picture. This was at a wine tasting. So yeah, anyway, so very sad farewell today. Okay, Thunderous, back to you.
Yeah, I think I share and echo the sentiments of the audience that are listening, saying sorry for your loss, Lloyd, and your family.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, anyway, before I get too emotional.
To continue then, so that's pretty much how the media was in the 70s and 80s, that you would have a debate program and you'd have 2 or 3 alternative views, but the audience were entertained with what those views were, and you would go through an intellectual process in your own mind as to why you agreed or why you disagreed with whatever certain point of view. But we're finding that doesn't get aired anymore, and if it does get aired, you tend to find that the questions that are selected for the panel to answer tend to be chaperoned, or those questions have gone through some kind of process of whether they'll be allowed to be asked or not.
Right.
And another, which is why when you're listening to any kind of debate program, if that's what they are these days, I think they call them debate programs, but there's anything but a debate taking place because the questions have already been filtered through. Another tactic that's used, and I wanted to mention this as well, is what can take place. As an example, on the BBC in the late 90s and the early 90s was a program called The Big Question, and used to air on a Sunday morning. I think it was maybe 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning for about an hour, and it would be broken up into 3 components. So 3 questions would be asked. So the first part of the program will deal with the first question, second part of the program will deal with the second question, and obviously the third part of the program will deal with the third question. And sometimes, quite frequently in fact, you'd have religious questions, and sometimes the question about whether God existed or not would be asked. And the interesting a tactic they would use is on the question of whether God existed or not, they would have someone like Richard Dawkins on the program, who is a respected biologist, promoting his atheistic point of view that there is no such thing as God. Darwinian evolution is a proven fact. It's as proven as any fact has been proven. But then they'll get somebody to defend the intelligent design point of view. And predominantly what they would do with that is find somebody who couldn't speak English properly and wasn't able to articulate the evidence against Darwinian evolution. So the audience are watching somebody who is a recognized scientist, a professor, educated in Oxford. So he has a certain amount of steam and authority behind him, and then they're listening to a pastor who is basically sounding like he doesn't speak English very well and isn't able to articulate his point of view across. So the audience, by default, will then side with Richard Dawkins on the matter, and then, which is basically nothing short of academic gatekeeping. Then another tactic is as well, and you might, and I'll ask you the question on this, Lloyd. You teach martial arts, don't you?
Yes, kind of. Well, I mean, I teach. Yeah, okay, sure. Let's say yes.
Okay, so my family teach martial arts. My brother's a sensei in kickboxing. Would you say if somebody who's an expert or a sensei in kickboxing would be just as good a sensei in, say, Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
I mean, it takes serious commitment to develop skills in both. You can be good, but at some point, one of them is you probably dominant. One of them is supplemental.
Sure.
So I think you would specialize in one. You would have a sub-specialization in another. So someone, if
Yeah.
he's very strong and very talented, sure, but not necessarily. The sensitivities, the timings, the rhythms, they're different.
Yeah. And there's some certain type of muscle techniques, there's certain blocking techniques, there's certain types of core strength that you need, that, which is different for each kind of sport. But the thing I was trying to get at is that if you have a sensei that's an expert in, say, kickboxing, that doesn't mean to say that just because he's skilled in kickboxing, he would know anything about Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It's a totally different discipline. But the natural inclination of a human being is, oh, he's a martial artist, he's a sensei. So if he's a sensei of this kind of martial arts, he would automatically be an expert in another type of martial arts, predicated on the fact that they're both self-defense techniques. But that's not the case. It's a totally different discipline. There might be certain core principles that you can transfer with the skill set from one to the other.
There's certain attributes you can take across, maybe like
Yes.
aggression and so on, or sensitivity, but there's certain skills which don't necessarily translate well. Having skill in one thing doesn't necessarily make you skilled in another, unless you spend significant time developing some level of skill.
Yes. And the thing is with the audience, though, as an example, I remember watching a physicist on the big question, defending the fact that there is no God and the universe can come about by nothing, because that's really where the physicist's standpoint is. The universe happened by nothing. But then he starts talking about biology and like the chemical it's possible that from their point of view it happens, so it is possible that you can have chemicals come together in a primordial soup to create the first cell which goes on and sort of manifests as life all over the earth. But the audience perception is that because this is a physicist and he's an expert in that field, that automatically transfers to, say, biology. That's not the case. They're totally different disciplines, but the audience can't make that connection or disconnection, rather, that because you're an expert in one does not mean you're an expert in another. So there is that fallacy as well in the way that propaganda is worked with the masses, that if we put an expert in this particular field and he starts talking about another field, well, the audience's automatic inclination and default is they're going to listen to him and take what he's got to say, because if he's an expert in one, the likelihood is going to be an absolute expert in the other one as well. And that's another technique that's been
used. I noticed Rick Bass just mentioned Dawkins got destroyed by John Lenox. I mean, John Lenox is so brilliant, and Richard Dawkins is a terrible philosopher. His philosophy is horrible. And you know, if he spoke to, say, Stephen Meyer, he'd have someone who can match him. And so yeah, just briefly, Sean Wright's asking, much of what I do, martial arts wise, I studied criminals, and I learned from criminals how they commit crimes, how they commit violent crimes, how they assault, how they ambush, how they make people not alive anymore. And I learned from criminals who'd been to prison for this kind of thing, and we studied them for several years, and I codified a lot of this, working with some people, codified it, and so I teach ambush and counter ambush, very close range, and I say close range, literally up to physically touching, and show people how to effectively assassinate. That's kind of the skill set that I generally have, and yeah, it's something that's slowly maybe building momentum here in Poland. We'll see how it goes.
Um, Bastate makes a point in the comments. It says a good example of this is Noam Chomsky is a linguistic, but he speaks on economics constantly. And you raised a very good point that I've actually got an episode by James Corbett on my channel called Noam Chomsky, Academic Gatekeeper, which I recommend the audience to go watch for themselves. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but there's one point where he turns around and talks about, say, 911. And whether I think a majority of people would say that the narrative that we've got from America is that the narrative doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not going to mention conspiracies or anything like that, but there's too many anomalies in the narrative. But what Noam Chomsky is basically saying is that we have to take the narrative as gospel, because the people who are questioning the narrative and going in for the conspiracies are not experts in, say, architectural structural engineering. So in effect, what he's saying is, unless you're an architectural structural engineer, you're in not a position to question whether the narrative that is being sold by the American government is real or not. So it's hiding behind an academic achievement to suggest that unless you've got that achievement, you can't make any sense of, basically, or challenge the narrative. And I think he made the same comments about the execution of JFK.
Yeah, but
back in
one
the
of the issues of atheism is that, in terms of the atheist movement coming from the Enlightenment onwards, is that scientists are the new priestly class. Scientists are the new class of overlords, shall we say, and what they say goes, because what they say is 100% correct, and everyone else must thus just submit to that. And this is just another form of totalitarianism, using science as an excuse.
Absolutely. That's, you don't question the science and you don't question the scientists. That's pretty much where it's all going. And Darwinian evolution, as it stands at the moment, is definitely the sacred cow that cannot be challenged at any level, irrespective of what evidence, or should I say, lack of evidence. And there's a monumental lack of evidence. In fact, there is not even the hint of evidence to suggest that Darwinian evolution is even possible, never mind that it did happen. But that's a separate subject. But Noam Chomsky, I'd recommend that on my channel, Noam Chomsky, Academic Gatekeeper.
Right. So today your plan was to talk about, was it atheism today? Your reason for
Yeah, what it is that I suppose last week we were talking about my experiences of being brought up as Muslim, and there was so much to say. I remember coming away from the show last week that there was so much more that I hadn't mentioned, and I think because I hadn't written anything down as a structure, that's probably why I missed so much out. But I suppose, in short, as soon as I was old enough to leave home, or legally leave home in England, that's exactly what I did. So I left home in about 1985 when I was 16 years old, and got myself a little council property, as it were, then. And but by the time I'd left home, it wasn't a natural progress that because I was brought up as a Muslim, I'd have an inclination towards believing in a God. What I'd found, because of my own experiences and going abroad and seeing what happens abroad as well, in these kind of Islamic countries, being brought up in the Asian community, but also as well the wickedness as it was then in the world. This system is very good at gearing up people to becoming to hate God or dislike God or not have a God belief, because the way that we're made as human beings in God's image. So there's a sense of justice and righteousness within us that reflects God's personality and sense of justice. So when we see that kind of injustice taking place in the world, whether it's through war or through famines or just sufferings on a daily basis of normal human beings, your natural inclination is to veer towards atheism. Okay, so I guess for when I left home, that's exactly what I did. I veered towards atheism, though atheism wasn't a thing then. what it is and what it was for me at the time was Darwinian evolution. That was the alternative. Because it's very binary. It's very absolute. There either is a God or isn't. So if you don't have a God belief, and because of the wickedness, your natural default is going to be, well, I just believe in Darwinian evolution because that's the only one that seems to make sense in all of this. But as you're going through the process of trying to understand Darwinian evolution, there are so many components that don't make sense. But at the time, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, there wasn't that much. There was certainly no internet. There was no social media as such. You had to rely on going to, say, the library if you wanted to research information. And I'm not going to suggest for a minute that as soon as I left home, the first thing I did was start getting some papers and pens and writing down notes and going to the library and trying to find out whether Darwinian evolution was a reality or not. That's certainly not true. I was very much caught up in the spirit of the world at the time. I think I mentioned last week that music is my thing. And I got caught up because at that time, 1985 in the UK dance scene had just started to explode.
On that, let me mention something. You mentioned that atheism has scientific pretensions. Right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to read this little definition. We've got Christian morals, and then you've got other moral systems like Islam, which vehemently denies the fact that it literally codifies and makes righteous sleeping with little girls, right? Because the perfect man, Muhammad, literally had sex with a minor child. And now, Enlightenment naturalist morals emphasize reason, empirical evidence, and the pursuit of knowledge as the foundation of ethical principles. In other words, science, using formulas, using mathematical thinking, using you can do what is right by doing, if we kill these 10 people, these 500 people will live. So let's just shoot these 10 people in the head. That's quite honestly the final outcome of the logical outcome of this kind of thinking. They prioritize individual rights. Freedom of thought, okay? Now, you've got to be very careful how they mean these words and the importance of ethical behavior based on critical thinking rather than religious or traditional authorities. Now, freedom of thought, well, I just turned into a woman. Then did you guys see the transformation? I just turned into a woman. I'm free to think and I'm free to be, and it's my right to be a woman, you see? And these morals promote intellectual curiosity, skepticism. Well, I don't believe in God, but I believe that I am a she-goat. I'm a furry, I'm a woman, okay, and the belief in progress through education, well, depends how you define education, and rational inquiry, well, depends how you define reason. And they emphasize the importance of equality, tolerance, and human dignity. Now, it's a lovely definition, but the simple fact is the Enlightenment morality, this whole idea of naturism or naturalism, this morality was the idea that every human is perfect. You are born perfect, and whatever you believe, whatever feelings that you have that come out of you, right? These are right, these are correct because you are perfect, and whatever comes out of you, no one can tell you that you're wrong, and therefore your feelings are perfectly acceptable, perfectly moral, perfectly normal. And if you feel that you need to go and steal that watch over there, or you feel you need to go and do something that we would otherwise term illegal, well, no one should stop you because that's your right, because your feelings are dictating the correct thing. This is actually the morality. This is utter chaos. And as Thunderous pointed out, that would mean, well, what would that mean, Thunderous? What would that imply?
Well,
you mentioned it's do what thou wilt is the whole of the law.
Do
that
what
is
thou
Satanism.
wilt. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do what thou wilt. The pleasure principle.
Yes. So therefore, this is actually just chaos and ultimately Satanism. Hence, atheism, as I've shown before, is very much aligned with, very much connected with Satanism. And the Enlightenment is very much a satanic movement. And that's something I need to talk about as well. I've got the notes, I just haven't done anything with it, but I actually have my notes already done. Thunderous, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so so my life at the time was pretty much caught up in the UK dance scene as it was from 1985 moving forward. But that doesn't mean to say that I ignore the fact that there was this constant, if you like, schism in my mind, or a mosquito in my mind. It will settle every now and again, but it will start buzzing about, what's going on in the world as it was then. And the world in the 80s was not as wicked as it was today, by far. It's almost like I'm living on a different planet with the way the world is at the moment. But there was still bad things taking place at the time. So the question would reappear every now and again about, is there a God or isn't there? And there were many things that in my life that I looked at that I couldn't quite understand. How can there not to be a God? But there wasn't any forthcoming answers to defend that there is a God, because you're growing through a period of time where God is being challenged in the media, the existence of God. Every time that you watch a nature program, Uncle David Attenborough would always turn around and say that this is how it evolved, that's how that evolved. So evolution as a word will predominantly feature in the nature program as if it was a spoken fact. And you've just come out of an education system that had pretty much chaperoned your thinking that you don't challenge those in authority. So you're pretty much having to say, well, you recognize a human being as being an intelligent person for the position and authority that they have. So your automatic default is, well, they must know what they're talking about. They couldn't be lying and they couldn't be mistaken. So you don't question the person, but there's that cognitive dissonance in your mind whirling away. Well, that don't make sense. That don't make sense. That don't make sense. One of them for me was language, and the other one was evidence of transitional fossils. So as time was moving forward, you start noticing the decay in morality. And I'd like to pick up on a point in the United Kingdom. I think it must have been about 1992 at the time. And I was dating a woman that was very much into soap operas, which I used to refer to as the cancer of society, or the gangrene of society, because the immorality that you see in a soap opera only later then manifests in society. It's almost like, I don't think it's a coincidence that they call it programs on TV, programs or programming, almost like programming society into a pattern of thinking. And one of the programs had the first lesbian kiss. And that for me was a catalyst to start thinking deeper about what's going on, because I thought to myself, well, now you're introducing same-sex relationships as early as in the early 90s. And I also worked out, well, it's quite interesting that you use two women and not two men to introduce this contrary to nature relationship. Because had it been two men, I think you had found a lot of men would have probably kicked up a fuss against it and wrote in with their disgust towards it. And women, because I know some lesbian women, and I've actually heard some lesbian women say that they find two men kissing each other a bit of a turn off and quite off-putting.
No, actually, men respond, heterosexual people respond to the picture of two men kissing the way we would if we were asked to eat worms or maggots. We react with revulsion, whereas both men and women find women kissing to be erotic. Even women are not mostly offended by that image. So it was a very smart move.
Yes, and also because it was a soap opera, you're caught up in the storyline, the romantic storyline or the romantic narrative. So when you're caught up in the romantic narrative, you don't tend to see the end product as being something contrary. So I thought it was a fantastic marketing strategy to start the normalization of contrary to nature behavior.
But I was reading through in something on homoeroticism that Princeton University in the 70s received funding to develop a marketing campaign to normalize gay relationships, because it was then defined as something that was abnormal, and they were actually paid to develop a way to sell it to the public. So there was an active campaign to make it acceptable, and once you get the foot in the door, everything else follows. Wow, thank you, Chef Riati.
Of course. So once you've introduced it, once you've normalized it in one area, you've pretty much normalized it in every area then. So once you've normalized it with, say, a lesbian relationship, you've then got to normalize it with a gay relationship as well. So that was like a catalyst for me to start asking questions with what was going on in the world and start, because you see, my attitude was then, if there is no God, then why is it society deems that thieving is wrong, because do we not see animals steal, monkeys steal, hyenas steal,
And right
magpies
now
as
in
birds?
California and in lots of places, we're seeing lots of, let's just say, non-Europeans do a lot of stealing, and it's
Yeah,
legitimized, it's acceptable, and we know which
exactly.
groups are doing it.
Of course, in this country, we've got a problem with blatant open shoplifting, where the security guards have to let the shoplifters steal. We have video footage on a regular basis, and in some stores, the main supermarket stores now have to wear what are they called? Cameras that you wear, body
Oh,
cameras,
body
body
cams.
cameras. Yeah, so as to make sure that they don't get harmed by the people. Anyway, we digress. But the point being,
Yeah.
these things they're normalized. So then you see in nature that insects deceive. They're very much like stick insects. They're camouflage, or other animals have a type of camouflage. I'm thinking to us, well, if we come from the animal kingdom, and we're seeing rape as an example happens in the animal kingdom. You've lived in Africa, Lloyd. You will know how lions behave. If you've got, say, a lone lion, I forget what the terminology is, a lion that walks around on its own, is not part of a pride, and it comes across a pride, it'll fight the alpha male of that pride, kill the alpha male, and what does it do to the cubs of that
Kills the
alpha male
cubs.
of that?
Kills the
Kills the
cubs.
cubs,
Yeah, and
and
then
then rapes the other lionesses. All
yeah,
right.
that's just the way that is. That's in nature. But yeah.
Yeah, and what do chip? I don't know if people know much about this, but chips tend to be portrayed as being very kind, close to human beings, and compassionate animals. I can assure you, people need to do some research on chimps, because they are
Yeah.
far from compassionate, kind animals. They are nothing of sort. These creatures are vicious, immensely strong, but absolutely vicious. They don't actually kill. What they'll do is they'll bite off the noses or the ears or the fingers of their enemies, and sort of like disable them. That's the way that they treat. So I'm thinking to myself, well, if we come from all these if all these traits in the animal kingdom are normalized and treated as normal, and I am nothing more than an advanced ape, then why is it then what I'm told is wrong when I behave in a certain way, yet the animal kingdom seems to behave like that with immunity and impunity? If it's
Can
just
I?
natural, why is the human being selected to behave in that's wrong to manifest these kind of behaviors, when the animal kingdom is full of behavior like this? Rape is normal, cannibalism is normal, stealing is normal. These
And
things are
this is a very
normal. But why?
negative, nihilistic view of man. It's a. Can I show something? Let me mention, if I
Sure.
may, on this topic. Let me jump to. This is. Everyone knows that I will be talking, so I'll start next week. I will be talking. So okay, so wait. Next week I'm going to be bringing up this topic because I have to do a lot of reading for this particular thing. Next week, I'm going to be going through this particular paper. It's Rollins Scholarship Online, Master of Liberal Studies thesis, 2012 PhD thesis called Luther and Hitler, a linear connection between Martin Luther and Adolf Hitler's anti-Semitism. Now, this paper starts off very, very well. It's 83 pages, but it's triple spaced, so it's only like 30 pages of text really at the end of the day. And let's just say the idea of a strong connection with strong similarities and parallels between Hitler and Martin Luther is not as far-fetched as you'd think, right? And one of the things this is on the discussion of morality. I'm going to talk about what they say here. And this paper, she starts off very well. And she's not the only person. There are multiple scholars that I've read that say similar things. That we know one side of Martin Luther because we've been sold, we've been given one side of this man. But there's another side, for instance, they speak of here is the pervasive portrayal of Luther is simple. The young, impassioned monk who took on the Roman Catholic Church and won. However, Luther is much more complex, with a darker side that is much less well known. Okay? And Protestant Christians were careful to let only Luther's legacy live on while downplaying the less favorable version. And she goes on to discuss, and she's not a Catholic to my knowledge, discusses Martin Luther's dark side. And there are other papers on the same topic, right? I'll be talking about this first. We're going to talk about the line between Martin Luther and Adolf Hitler. And there's much more of a line. Now, here's one example of how Martin Luther, shall we say, rewired European morality, how he changed the view of morality. Let's have a look at this. This is on a book called Luther. This is a chapter called Luther and Disability. It's in a book called Disability in the Christian Tradition, and it talks about like how disability was viewed in the Bible. And let's have a look at Martin Luther, and this is one of the topics I'll be discussing. A monster and a saint, two images of Luther. Luther is the monster of Table Talk number 5207, and here's where Protestants are going to jump in and say, well, that's a weak hadith. And I'll say, really? Okay, so it says, Martin Luther suggested to suffocate a 12-year-old boy to death, right? To suffocate a 12-year-old boy who was suffering from Prader-Willi syndrome. And this was seized upon by the National Socialists to vindicate the legalization of the killing of disabled people. Now, I will show more of this, but what happens is he says, look, what we should do is we should either drown the boy, take him down to the river and drown him, because Martin Luther saw the boy, he met the boy, he was there. He saw the boy and he said, you need to kill this boy, take him and drown him, okay, or suffocate him to death using a pillow. Now, would you say that this is the Christian thing to say, Thunderous?
Absolutely not. And you've just reminded me, maybe you can remind me in a moment, Canada.
Canada is now the Nazis, when I go through the other paper on Nazism, the Nazis used to kill the disabled because that's what Martin Luther said, that's the Christian thing to do, right? And the Nazis jumped on that, and we had the Nuremberg war trials, which hung the people that made these decisions. And now Canada is doing exactly what the Nazis were hung for.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people are not aware about what's going on at the moment, because when you've removed objective theistic moral values from society, which pretty much what Darwinian evolution and atheism have done, you've allowed these things to creep into society as an alternative. In Canada, one of the things that they're doing, they're extending euthanasia to people with mental illness. Once you've started that slippery slope of introducing it to mental illness, where else do you where else is it going to go to? And it says there, for instance, in this article Martin Luther about people with physical disabilities. Well, mental illness is a mental disability. All you're doing is just extending it one further to a physical disability. And the problem with mental illness is how to define and categorize what is by definition a mental illness.
Yeah.
So this is already law in America about extending the euthanasia to people with mental illness, and I think it's just one step away from what we're talking about here now.
So this also goes back. So when I bring up Martin Luther, when I start discussing Martin Luther, now I met with one of the guys I met on YouTube this weekend. I met him, and he told me that apparently Anthony Rogers was on a show. And he was talking about Luther, apparently, and then someone actually asked a question with a super chat, which they had to show on the screen, but where they said I can't remember exactly the details, but they said that Lloyd said that this and that about Martin Luther. And apparently Anthony Rogers did not like the question. Apparently the expression on his face was not a happy one. And then he said that these are apocryphal writings that are attributed to Luther. In other words, it's a weak hadith, brother. That's not Sahih. That is da'if. That's da'if. Now, that's very sad. But now I'm still working on this. But apparently this is a quote by Martin Luther. So I'm still working through a lot of this stuff. This is Martin Luther's view of God. And this plays into morality. And this is how this nominalism has affected this. And so we're being hit from multiple sides. Let's see. Where the men of war can be in a blessed state, 1526. I would almost like to boast that since the time of the apostles, the secular sword and authority have never been so clearly described and praised as by me. Even my enemies have to admit it, and for this I deserve a reward. The sincere gratitude that my teaching is scolded and suspected in a seditious manner. Praise be to God for that. God hangs, God wheels, God beheads, God kills, and God wages war. These are all his works and his judgment. Is this the same God that we know about, or is Luther worshipping a different God? Just my question.
Well, the question answers itself. Which God is this that he's worshipping? Because it's not the God that we know of the Bible.
This is the God of war, and we know that God is Allah. So yeah, anyway, but there's a lot to be said about Martin Luther, and I'm going to be unpacking as much as I can find about Martin Luther. But morality is under attack, not just from within the church, but outside the church. Would you agree that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. But morality being under attack has to have a precedence or a foundation. and atheism is the foundation, or scientific atheism, which is predicated on. I keep going on about Darwinian evolution, and the reason why I keep doing it so because I think it's probably the most mendacious, serious influence on the Western world ever since its inception. And I think much of the problems that we're having in the world today all stem from Darwinian evolution and Francis Galton's eugenics. Both those two together have united.
Well, no. Francis Galton came up with the word, but Darwin was a eugenicist. His whole family were involved in the eugenics movement. They were devout eugenicists. He created eugenics, for that matter. Right. Yeah. And Francis Galton was his cousin.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. It's just that from say a standard evolution narrative, that's what we have, though. You're when you delve much deeper. You mentioned a moment ago about that people are playing down Luther's say tendencies, but the thing is, you've already brought out that Charles Darwin also had evil tendencies in the way that he used to kill animals for fun.
Oh yeah, he murdered animals. I mean,
and he's not even a scientist. The guy was just a failed theologian. That's all he was. He was not scientific in any sense of the word. And yet he's buried in poets, in genius corner. And yet people don't realize this about who the character is. So we're living in a world today of very much a chaperone narrative that is put upon, foisted upon a very ignorant society.
Yeah. Can you see this quote by Luther here, Thunderous?
I confess that I cannot forbid a person to marry several wives, for it does not contradict Scripture. Really.
Yeah. How many wives do you want, Thunderous? Luther says it's just fine.
But the thing is, you see, he contradicts what Jesus said. So in effect, he's saying he knows more than Jesus, because when Jesus actually, I forget which, I think it's in the book of Mark, whereas when talking to the Pharisees, and I think it was over the situation over the resurrection, where a woman, her husband died and he had a wife, and then she was passed down to the brother. Then he died. She was passed out to the next brother. In the end, she married 7 brothers. They all died, and in the end, she died. And the Pharisees asked, well, to which one of these brothers will she be married to at the resurrection? And then Jesus actually goes on to say, did you not know, for instance, he who created them in the beginning created a male and female, singular, not plural, right?
Yeah, and a man shall cleave to his wife. And also it states St. Paul also speaks of every man should have one wife, and every woman should only have one husband. That is very explicit in the scriptures.
Yes. Absolutely. I think the one wife one, I think that might be 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5.
I'll actually bring that up now, because I've actually been working on that, on exactly that. Yeah. So should also be the husband of one wife. I've got multiple references to it because I'm working through that. But there's more specifically, Paul speaks of a man should have one wife and a woman should have just one husband. And hold on, let me actually find the term. I have it here. Paul isn't here. Paul advises each man to have one wife and each woman her own husband. And this is in 1 Corinthians 7, which goes against the actual this advice of Philo. I know Dr. Jonathan Gemmell mentioned Philo earlier. But Philo actually says sexual relations should only be for procreation. Paul's view says no, that also to avoid temptation, but he also says that men and women there needs to be a sharing and equality between them. Yes. So he speaks of sexual intimacy. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Paul also said, I think it's because Paul was also cautioning about using sexual intimacy between a wife and husband and wife, because they can become weaponized against each other. Yeah, so because the problem is, if you start weaponizing sexual intimacy from one to the other, you're going to cause a problem in the marriage, because if you're not going to get it from your partner, where else are you going to go? You're going to go outside the marriage bounds to get that sexual connection.
Yeah. So he acknowledges the temptation to morality, and it says it's good for a man, so for husband and wife, and their bodies belong to each other. He speaks of that. I mean, there's actually a great deal of moral discussion within the biblical, the New Testament, and also this is something I'm going to be discussing at length in the near future. My current discussion, this is 148 slides in this one right now. on a discussion on the early church, right? It's going to end up being 300 slides, I can see, or more. But we're going to be talking about that. Also, hold on, there's a couple of things I want to mention. Hold on, can I? There's this big discussion about women must be silent. That's actually something to. It's actually worth discussing within this text. Um, oh, you know, Martin Luther also quotes 3 Maccabees when he talks about how the Jews must be treated. That actually comes out of 3 Maccabees, I discovered. But also, let's see. Let me have a quick look at something. Oh, can I show something? Since we're on this topic of morality, and um, in 1 Timothy 2:12, people lose their minds because in 1 Timothy 2:12 it says that women should be silent, and this is commonly used as an attack on the church, on Christian doctrine as being misogynistic, and this is completely false because I've actually I've collected together some of the best literature on this topic. And that discussion is in Paul writing to a very specific church, which is having a very specific problem, and it relates to a specific woman. And this word he uses is the authority. Women must submit to the authority of the man, right? And what's interesting is that when the word authority is used here, there are multiple words in Greek that Paul could have used. But for whatever reason, he uses the word authority in the sense of the perpetrator of a murder, in the context of murder, suicide, and violence, the perpetrator of a crime. He actually uses that, and what it turns out is, when you look at the use of that word historically, it's that the woman has no right to dominate a husband to such a degree that she causes him psychological or physical harm, that she kills him, hurts him. And so he's speaking of the woman must submit to the authority of the man, and she must not have authority. He means she must not have toxic, domineering, bullying, murderous intent, and apply authority in that fashion. And it's really interesting that there's so much misrepresentation of the Bible that I've discovered, that where we've been given these half exegesis, and it's actually very a specific case that he's referring to here. Back to you, Thunderous.
Yeah, so going through the 90s, these were the questions that are going through my mind about that. When you look at the animal kingdom, then why is it then that human beings are separate, and why do I feel the way I do about certain things? If I had to describe myself upon reflection now, even though I may have described myself as a Darwinian evolutionist at the time, I wasn't really sincere with it. I think it was a wishful thinking, but I think if I had to describe myself, I would say I was an antinatalist. I'd pretty much decided not to have children by then. I pretty much decided not to get married. And those are the things that, as a human being, that you want in your life. You want to get married and share companionship. But I just dreaded the thought that one day I'll wake up one day and my wife is dead, or she'll wake up one day and I'm dead. And I think, well, what's the point of life? What was the point of all of that?
So atheism just leads to nihilism. It's a death cult in a real sense. It kills your spirit to live. It gives you a terribly negative idea of the future.
Absolutely, because the negative idea of the future is all there is in Darwinian evolution and atheism. There is no prospect, there is no goal, there is no hope, you're going exactly to the same place you were the moment before you were conceived. That's where you're going to. It's a one-way oblivion, to death, and death's going to strike at you from the point of view I had at the time. It could be by an accident, it could be through a murder, it could be through disease, it could be through war, it could be just natural causes, as they call it. But the fact of the matter is, as the phrase goes, there's only 2 things guaranteed in life: death and taxes. And that's pretty much what my view was. There was not much point in me investing in a career, buying a house, or getting further education. I'm not going to be arrogant here and turn around and say I'm a particularly smart man, but I think I'm probably smarter than most people. I had the opportunity to go and do university or college. I chose not to do those things because I just saw it was. I think the best example upon when I realized now. That the Bible contains so many sort of gems, and one of the biggest gems for me is the first 4 chapters of Ecclesiastes. Solomon sums it up perfectly what life is. It's just vanity. There's no, it's a pointless life, and you do kind of get a slight sense of antinatalism in the way that Solomon is speaking. So that would be pretty much my worldview at the time. Only I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. I just looked at it as Darwinian evolution.
So
But
how do you feel now that you've once you made the
well,
change, once you converted? I
well,
mean, how do you see life and how do you see the world now?
there's a journey. There's a journey there, though. To be fair, Lloyd, I wanted to write a book, and the book was called Prison. And the arguments I was going to propose was it was a fiction, and the idea was that we're living in a world where religion is destroyed, religion is banned. There's no more religion, and Darwinian evolution is what prevails, and that's an entire global system headed by one government. But some people find it particularly, how can I say, it doesn't connect with them. They can't reconcile that this is a fact. So they start committing crimes in order to prove Darwinian evolution wrong. They start committing crimes, and every time that they get arrested, it's supposed to be a dark humor book, this anyway. And they, like, for instance, they will rape, and then they'll get arrested for rape, go to court, but then they would cite some animal in the animal kingdom that lives by going out raping. Like, for instance, we use the example
And this
earlier on
is
about the lion.
natural somehow?
Exactly, that it's natural. So they get let off in court, and then they commit crimes like stealing, they commit murders, they commit deceptions, and every time that they get caught, they keep getting released because they're using the Darwinian argument against the judicial system and keep getting let off until to a point where it becomes kind of obvious that the Darwinian argument does not work because it doesn't reconcile with the human being nature in its sense of justice. So that's pretty much where I was. But then I started asking questions about Darwinian evolution, and that's really when it all came apart for me, when I realized the deception that goes in place in this thing called science. I notice you're looking at the Georgia Guidestones.
So yes, I want to
Sorry,
mention something because you're making me think of the. Okay, so I don't know if people are familiar with the Georgia Guidestones that I'm showing here right now, but someone blew these up not that long ago, and it was a mystery who put these there. And the Georgia Guidestones speak of how this guy wants to reduce the world to 500 million people. In other words, they want to kill 7.5 billion people. So they want to kill, 80%, 90% of the world. And they think that a sustainable amount of people is 500 million. And then someone blew these up, and no one was very unhappy about that. But they speak here of a one world government. And the guy who created it has been discovered. It's a guy called Robert C. Christian, apparently. And this is a pseudonym, which is interesting that he uses the pseudonym Christian. Just like the guy that created the Rosicrucians is called, has the name Christian. Okay? Christian Rosenkranz, okay? Or Rosenkreuz. So it's very odd that they call themselves Christians, which means they're Gnostics. They're fake Christians. And so he actually wrote a book. So it's been discovered now that the guy who did the Georgia Guidestones actually wrote a book. And he speaks of, in the book, that he wants a one world government. Right? So this is the Georgia Guidestones. So it's been discovered now. Now we know who did this. And he wants a one world government and a one world religion. So I mean, and these are crazy atheists that that want these kind of things, and it's just, I mean, these ideas are insane. Yeah.
So I don't, people describe themselves at this level that they're atheists. I actually don't think that they're atheists. I think they're saying that to other people, so it makes atheism
Satanists
sound
at
good.
the end of the day, but I mean, Satanism and atheism are very much the same in many ways. I've covered that before.
So and as far as the one world government is concerned, if you take your Bible as being true and as the true word of God, I think when you look at the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 13, I think it's pretty much obvious that there is going to be some kind of system set up which will be governed centrally. And much of what we're seeing in the world today seems to be going towards a centralization of power in many areas. Going to the point about reducing the human population by 500,000, I think we're living in a world today where the human population is growing. Now, God in the Bible says, fill the earth and subdue it. However, these people say, no, we need to reduce population. Now, for anybody that's got even entry-level intelligence can do some entry-level research and find that the planet Earth is nowhere near overpopulated. Cities are
Yeah.
overpopulated. The planet is not. That is a blatant lie. The planet is not overpopulated. What we do have, right, because of the corruption of commerce and such, okay, we're having a situation where industry and production is being more automated, and therefore the need for manpower is being reduced. But we're having a population growth. So what you're finding is you're finding more human beings growing on the planet, whereas you're finding that productivity, as far as automation is concerned, is being reduced, because things are becoming more automated, centralized, and with electrics and robots and so on and so forth. That's where the problem is, in my opinion. So just going on with what we were saying before the show, and we were talking about the vaccine. Now, no one is making any comments about the vaccine here, but if you wanted to reduce the human population, you'd have to administer something globally that's going to cause a lot of damage to get the human population down.
True.
Make of that what you will. And then we've also had in the news this week in England and in Russia as well about the cancer vaccine that's been introduced, or the potential cancer vaccine that's been introduced. Make of that what you will. When you're looking at climate change, which is almost like a religion now for many activists are treating it as a religion, it affects the world. So you've had recently like a vaccine jab that's global. The climate change argument is global. The money situations around the world are global. Terrorism and war are global. You know, there seem to be global conflicts that are drawn in together to a centralization of something. And
and another thing, a word that I never thought would actually, I thought the word that used to be a joke, but this word I have on the screen right now, that's actually become a thing.
Globo Homo. That sounds like a porn star's name.
No, but really, I mean, it's like this used to be a joke, like, you know. But now it's a thing. Now everything is gay. On the Georgia Guidestones in his book, this guy writes, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason." That was the same claim as the Enlightenment. That's the same claim as the philosophers of the Enlightenment era. I mean, that was an era of atheist genocide. So this is really the ultimately, which was an occultic revolution. It was a Freemason revolution. It really was an occult blossoming. So this is really, I mean, it's an occult movement, and they claim to be atheists, but ultimately they turn out to be very little practical difference to Satanists.
Yeah. So I forget where I was, Lloyd. Where was I?
That's
I'll tell you what.
question.
We'll leave it there for once, because it's 7:30 now, and we said we'll only do an hour because you've got to get off. So maybe we can pick this up next week or the next time.
Yeah, it's true, but yeah, there's just so many things that you say things, and you make me think of other things. You know how these things are all connected, and it's like, well, it's just that we're getting hit on multiple fronts. Like you'll mention, you know, it's like, well, we're getting hit. I mean, look, the church is under attack from inside and from outside, and we need to separate these toxic influences inside and outside the church from the church itself, right, from the teaching itself, and we need to recognize it's the same source at the end of the day. Right? That's doing this. We need to understand the church is a human institution. It is going to have flawed people running it. This doesn't mean its mission is impure. This doesn't mean that what it wants to do is impure, that it must be abolished. It just means that we are human. We all fail. We all fall short, right? And we need to protect the church, not demolish it or abolish it. Your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you there. Human beings are human beings. They'll make errors. If you read from, say, Acts all the way to the book of Revelation, just talking about human being flaws, you'll find between Acts and the book of Revelation, what is Jesus and the Apostle Paul talking about? They're talking about more putting up with your brothers and your sisters than they are putting up with non-believers. The non-believers are putting up with people that don't have the same faith system as you. There's probably about 4 or 5 scriptures, whereas most of the scriptures are telling you to forgive your brothers, put up with your brothers, be long-suffering towards your brothers. You know, it's telling you how to deal with the imperfections of your brothers and sisters within the organization as it is to deal with people outside the organization. So the point that you're making there is absolutely spot on, dude.
You know, Yeah, no, sometimes, Thunderous, I know that we're not always talking the same conversation, but you say things that make me think of something else, and you always like sparking these ideas in my head. I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting perspective because now I see parallels, and I'm realizing the same problem is cropping up in another space and it's just, we are, it's the same source, though, at the end of the day, that's what I would conclude.
Yeah, yeah, I just want to finish up on one
Sure,
point. You
please,
you
please.
brought up the image of the United Nations and its I think weather modifications weapon
Yes.
ratification. I
Yeah.
think it's 1977. The reason why I wanted to I sent that to you, it's because not many people we're living in a society now where we're constantly told about global warming, climate change, so on and so forth. And I don't know how many disasters were supposed to have happened by 2024. We haven't had any that Prophet Al Gore has come out with, but none of them have come true thus far. But I wanted to bring that to your attention that whether modification weapon ratification or the United Nations, I think it's signed by how many countries? Is it 143, 147? I can't remember. But for me, it's a case of so they have weather modification weapons as far back as 1977,
Hmm.
but it's actually more sinister than that. At what point did they realize that the weather could be modified in the first place in order to have developed the technology to modify the weather and then to have a ratification for it that the countries wouldn't use it as a weaponized tool? So how much then do we see when we're being told about climate change? How much of that is man-made per se with pollution and such, man-made pollution, and how much of it is actually man-made influence in order to sell an endgame agenda? Make of that what you will. I mean, I can only go by
Well,
the
look, I mean,
fact on the
there's certain
United
things. Look,
Nations.
some things are beyond my pay grade, and everyone knows here that I get paid weekly, very weekly, and that was a joke. And I mean, there's some things that I don't have answers for. I mean, that would be pure speculation or moving into conspiracy theory territory. But
No,
but I do think that we know that things are manipulated and people have intentions, whether or not they can achieve them. The intentions are there. Someone's been experimenting. These things are happening, and
no, no, that's what I'm trying to say, Lloyd. I'm not trying to mention conspiracy or anything like that, but the
yeah,
fact of the matter is, there is a technology that can modify the weather, and it's on
yeah.
the
I
United
mean, there
Nations.
are
It's not a
effective ways
conspiracy
of doing some of those
website.
things. But then
Yeah,
again, you know
so
what? Have you seen these experiments like in South America and other places where people have greened deserts? Within 7 years, when you start planting bushes, you can turn sand desert. We're talking dunes, sand desert, arid conditions to beautiful, lush forests
yeah,
within
yeah.
just years. So we don't need crazy science. We just need someone to plant some trees. Just to answer a question, someone mentioned altruism. The term altruism was I discussed this at length in my series on atheism. Actually, let me just find the reference. Let me just get that reference for you so that I. But the word altruism was created by a socialist, the same guy who created the idea of sociology. He was a crazy, literally mentally ill um, um, person who created his own religion. He basically took Christianity, developed his own version of Christianity based on a socialist form of Christianity. And let me find it for a second. Let me just share this on the screen for a moment. Let's go here. Uh, Auguste Comte, he coined the term altruism, usually regarded as generous and selfless dedication, but he meant it in an anti-capitalist and anti-Christian way. And he said, the medieval adoration of God must now be transmuted into the adoration of a new divinity, the goddess humanity. In other words, man in the image of man worshipping himself. In other words, Satanism. Sacrifice for the sake of the Lord is outdated. It must give way to sacrifice for the sake of others. In other words, give up your whiteness for the sake of those black people from Africa. Give up your nice home for those poor, poor refugees that you personally enslaved and you personally impoverished. Give up your home, pay more taxes. You need to, global warming, you're killing these poor migrants. Give up your, pay more money. Do you understand? So basically, you're being sold lies. You're being told Christianity is being redefined by people who hate Christianity, and you're being manipulated. So altruism is not a Christian virtue. I don't know if you can see this, Thunder. So let me just show it to you. Let's spend a moment on this. But there you go. You should be able to see this now, Thunderous.
Not yet.
So yeah, so he says man must be selfless. He must renounce. So in other words, you have to give up your own personal rights for the good of the masses. In other words, communism. For the good of everybody, you must be willing to die. You must be willing to sacrifice. You must see yourself as an ant who just sacrifices for the good of the communist society. That is what altruism is. Do not think that it's Christian. This is by someone who created an anti-Christian communist religion. So do understand? And this guy was mentally ill. He was bloody insane.
Right then. So, so what I'll do is then the next time we have a discussion, then I'll probably finalize my journey towards the Bible by discussing why I absolutely do not accept Darwinian evolution and what led me to accepting the
Yeah.
biblical narrative as reality.
No, agreed. I'd love to hear more of that because I mean that I actually learned about, I learned the best arguments against atheism from you. You put me on the journey to develop my own material because I was very ignorant, and you're the one who woke me up to that. It's Auguste Comte for someone who asked. Auguste Comte or Auguste Kant. I don't know however you want to pronounce that. So yeah, so um, yeah, so guys, so be careful. Language. These people use language as a tool of manipulation, not as a tool of communication. Understand, they're lying to you one way or another. It's subtle lies. So everything must be traced to its roots, to its source. Everything to its source. Once you know the source, then you understand the truth. Any last words? Over to you, Thunderous. I mean, but this has been,
No,
I've learned a lot actually. This has been very interesting for me too, this discussion. Well, these
no,
discussions are very interesting. Yeah.
no, well, no. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy our discussions. I enjoy being part of your channel and the work that you're doing, and it's always a pleasure for me to have company with you and association with you. And I'd like to thank the audience as well. That the audience are very much the third party in this conversation, and thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for your generosity towards Lloyd. He does deserve it. He puts in a lot of hard work, and you've said some kind things to me about the things that we've discussed so far. But it's a team effort. You've done some fantastic work as well. I only merely mentioned one or two things, and then you go out there and you grasp everything in your sort of like net. You cast your net and you draw it all in, and all the whole audience benefits. Everybody that listens to you and watches your channel benefits, Lloyd. So thank you as
No,
well.
thank you.
And
Yeah.
I just, and on the final note, I want everyone to know that there are many good people out there that have put out some fantastic work with reference to Islam. But I think Lloyd has excelled because where people have been very one-dimensional in their argument, or they're only taken on one argument against the biblical narrative, Lloyd is taking on all arguments against the biblical narrative, and very few, if any, are actually doing that, and doing it very commendably as well. And
Yeah. Thank you.
Lloyd is being kind, saying that I've been the catalyst in many things and he's learned from me.
You
But I
did.
can assure you, if Lloyd has learned 5 things from me, I've learned 25 things from Lloyd.
No, thank you. I mean, look, but you've really inspired me. Your atheism stuff. I was thinking, how do I tackle this problem? Because it terrified me, and then and then I thought these guys had it all sewn up, and then when I heard you on Thaddeus, you laid it out so well. I was like, man. And also, we need to talk about the Samaritans. We need to discuss that. They are a plague in certain ways. We need to discuss that as well. You just mentioned that in terms of reference to Islam and issues. And then, yeah, at some point, I need to get back to Islam as well. And it's Hermetic occult links. We need to get into magic and occult in Islam. So, guys, yeah, I need to call it a night. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the very kind comments. And Thunderous, thank you, of course, for the the real intellectual stimulation as well. And also Francis Bull, I believe he's in the UK. He's in London. He's an ex-Muslim. He's been on Adam Seeker's show. I listened to him on Adam Seeker's talks. So he'd love to connect with you in a bar one day and have tea. So something to think about. So guys, yeah,
No,
thank you. And Bastate, you can find my email address in the about page. I have a sort of a redirect, which will send your email to me, and then I can email you from my mailbox if you'd like to. So guys, thank you very much. We'll be in touch. I will try and stream this week. Can't promise. Otherwise, I'll be back on Sunday night. Okay. So everyone, take care, and thank you, Thunderous. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
thank you, everybody.
God bless.
Bye bye. Thank you, Lloyd.